Hello. As was said, I'm Michelle Cortese, and this is Auteurism in 360 degrees. Thank you so much for having me. I am originally from Toronto, so I'm always happy to speak to people in my hometown. I want to kick things off with a brief intro. So as was said, I'm a product designer at Facebook. I'm currently working on the VR and 360 media team, and we're the team that's tasked with democratizing VR. And what that means is we don't design for the thousands of VR early adopters. We design with the goal of bringing immersive experiences to the billions of existing regular Facebook users. With this team, I work on a few different products. I'm the lead designer on 360 audio creator tools, 360 video creator tools and consumption experiences, and the new edition 3D posts. I don't know if you've seen that, but if you haven't, you should definitely look it up. I'm in love with it. So pictured here is the brand new 360 Director Suite, which is our video upload tool that is launching in beta next Friday, December 8th. I've been working on this for like several months. I'm very, very proud of it. But before Facebook, I was a senior design technologist at the femme-focused digital media company, Refinery 29. And before that, I was a senior design technologist at I was a senior experiential art director. I wish I could remember what I do, apparently. At Fake Love, which is the New York Times subsidiary that's responsible for doing all of the NYT VR apps, or a lot of the NYT VR apps branded content VR experiences. And you can see a couple of shout outs to those two places in the background of this image. But here's just a broader capture of my work and kind of what I've been doing for the past 10 years, and long before all of these projects, I was actually a student here at OCAD. I remember this room dearly. This is where my intro to history of design happened. And at that time, I was spending a lot of time dreaming of a much more dynamic, much more immersive web, and that impulse to create more exciting, more immersive experiences is really what led me through the eclectic journey that I've been on for the past 10 years. And that's the journey that brought me to 360 media and VR. And that excitement for the unknown is something that I've noticed in all of my new media focused colleagues kind of everywhere along the way. But there's something else that I've been noticing very recently, and it's on the flip side of this. It's a lot of weariness towards new mediums, and particularly right now we're seeing it a lot, and just people kind of denouncing things that pop up right at their outset. And I was seeing this really clearly when talking to a lot of our content creators, our key content creators at Facebook, and then ones just kind of out in the wild. A lot were struggling, and these are content creators, I'm referencing ones that were trying to make the transition from 2D to 3D or 360. And a lot of them were struggling to translate their process from that environment to 360. And some of them were even struggling to communicate how we could help them do so. And I really felt like there was a core problem occurring, and it was base level. It was that people were struggling to find the artistic merits and the metrics of success in this completely new medium. And then when seeking inspiration to solve this problem, it's problem that I've been pretty glued into for the past 6 months of my life, and prior also, but really stuck on the creator side recently. I realized that this had happened before, almost identically, and it was the dawn of cinema, the period of time when this movie and many others were made. And as new art forms gain more dimensions via technical progress, newer, more dynamic formats can be seen as being too close to reality, too objective. And this is what was happening during the early years of film. The media was seen as completely incapable of artistic expression due to its supposed implicit objectivity. And I threw up here a quote by film critic and perceptual psychologist Rudolf Arnheim. And he said this in 1933, opening his book that was titled Film as Art, by quoting criticism from his contemporaries. And the criticism was, film cannot be art, for it does nothing but reproduce reality mechanically. And this must, at this moment in time, feel completely familiar to criticisms that we hear about 360 and VR film, that, what is the point of recording a full environment if I can't really direct my viewer to a space, if I can't sort of architect one scene. So Anyway, the impression that I hope to give you today is to be able to see 360 media and VR film with as much opportunity as early film theorists saw in film. And particularly, I'm planning to draw structure and intention for this talk from essays from early 20th century pioneering film advocates from that time period when like the artistic merit of film had yet to be fully realized, just because it perfectly mirrors like where we're at with 360 film. And in addition to that, I'm hoping to demystify 360 filmmaking a little bit, and this is specifically about the filmmaking aspect of it, not necessarily the like game engine-based VR. And I'll explain its nature and offer you some artistic opportunities inspired by the successes of 2D filmmaking. Really, it's just like I want to give you a pathway from like Metropolis to Miyubi. That's the goal here, from one robot to another 100 years later. But first, I think it's really important that we sync on exactly like what I'm referring to when I say 360 film. And huge apologies to all of you that are already like well versed in the complexities and definitions of like VR and 360 film. I just find it really helpful to like precisely align in exactly like what type of media we're referring to. So let's review the basics. Easy stuff. The term 360 film, also known as immersive, also known as spherical, also known as VR video, really just defines films in which views from all 360 directions are being recorded simultaneously via omnidirectional camera or a collection of cameras, and then during the playback, the viewer has control of the viewing direction. Because 360 films are often live action or animation captures being the operative word there, and they're recorded from a fixed point. They have a set narrative and duration, and they're like not fundamentally interactive, and they don't allow users to freely explore 3D space. To contrast this, and we heard a bunch about these kinds of experiences right before this, Roomscale VR environments are experiences with freedom of motion within a designated space, and they can also be used to create narrative, cinematic, immersive experiences. But I need to be clear that this is a separate type of experience from what I'm talking about. 360 captures do not offer depth information at the moment, like the kind of depth information that is required to have like a fully, freely explorable space. So while Roomscale VR and 360 film can share consumption methods, headsets, for example, they're absolutely not the same thing. Okay, so base is covered, on to consumption. So how do we watch 360 content? Right now, while usually associated with virtual reality, 360 films can be consumed on actually like a variety of surfaces. So in addition to VR headsets, we can create 360 film to be watched on personal computers by like, where the viewer can click and drag through a space, on smartphones where they can watch via gyroscopic input, or even on smart TVs via remote input. And furthermore, the videos that we choose to project onto those surfaces can be either monoscopic or stereoscopic. There's kind of no limit to either of those. In case anyone doesn't know, again, more apologies for anyone who it's review for. Monoscopic and stereoscopic, two different styles. Stereoscopic being films that project two separate offset recordings onto each of the viewer's eyes, whereas monoscopic films project a single duplicated image onto both eyes. The benefits of stereoscopic is that it produces a much more realistic perception of depth. By having those two offset views, you can imagine it's as though two cameras are recording like two separate eyes. Cool, so on to making. 360 film is captured via a multi-camera rig or a multi-lens camera by filming overlapping views simultaneously, and then these separate views are stitched together into one spherical piece using internal software within the camera or specialized software during your editing process. Alternatively, animated 360 content can be created by placing a spherical capture object into a 3D program like Cinema 4D or Unity. Once compiled into a rectangular format, these videos can be edited using standard editing tools. So here are some options for, next slide. Just wanted to capture some options for recording 360 video in case anyone is like, I assume there's a lot of like very VR focused people here who use game engines, so there's just a massive gamut of different kinds of things at different price points that you could use, ranging from the gyroptic, which I have with me today, and I took a photo of all of you earlier, and I'm gonna take another one at the end, up to the Nokia Ozo, which is just, you know, a massive professional rig that costs $60,000. Some VR microphones on top and some software on the bottom. Cool, so let's imagine your immersive content is complete, it's exported, it's ready to go, and it's got the correct metadata. Well, there's two options that you can go with here to be able to publish it. And one would be, you would go the immersive, the sort of VR experience route, which is like optimizing for quality. You would be either uploading your app to a game app store, like the Oculus Store, for example, or delivering the experience in real life via tethered headset. The other option is to optimize for reach and publish your video as a video, not an app, but just a baked video onto different distribution platforms like Facebook or YouTube, which gives users a sort of plethora of viewing options. Cool, that was the boring, necessary stuff. But now, now that we've like covered the landscape, I think we can strictly focus this talk on, we are dealing exclusively with, from this point on, live action 360 video, recorded either mono or stereo, and recorded via 360 camera, and then designed to be published via mass distribution platforms for multi-surface consumption. Okay, so I hope this preamble helps to just break some of the mystery of the medium a little bit, if anybody had any mystery left. 360 film is absolutely not magic. It's just another dimensional addition on the media continuum, and that makes it part of a broader story, which makes it easier to understand. And that can be an important sentiment at a time period when this art form is just trying to find its like art presence as a recorded medium. But yet, its place on the continuum can make that easier to understand, but also every node on the continuum needs to be approached as a unique practice of its own, and that's where this talk really comes in. As was said by Arnheim in the same book that I referenced earlier, film is more than just a variation on the immobile image obtained by multiplication. It is new and different. And 360 media is more than just a variation on the moving image. At the time that Arnheim had said that, the artistic practices in film were not yet universally understood or agreed upon, just as they are currently not understood or agreed upon in 360 film. But Arnheim and his contemporaries had theories on which elements and techniques could be used to make film artful and impactful. So here's speculation from another film critic and writer of the early 20th century about the possible unique artistic appeal of the moving image. The basis and possibility of an art of the film is that everyone and everything looks what it is. So according to Balazs, cinema found its artistic presence in its humanity. He identified the key emotional opportunity of film as the opportunity to see man, for human experience to be captured and replayed completely at will. And given that the dimension that was added between classical film and 360 film is the degrees of space that are around us as viewers, it makes sense that 360's unique artistic properties would be derived from space and location. So, if cinema of the past realized its impact through the opportunity to see people exist exactly as they are, the impact of 360 film would come from its ability to allow viewers to experience place and presence. 360's unique charm is that no matter the consumption surface, it can take you places, like a roller coaster. So with all of this in mind, I've been trying to use that as this like starting point to design better 360 creation tools for filmmakers, and that's filmmakers coming from VR, filmmakers coming from flat media, and via my work at Facebook. And I've been poring over, and this has been like my personal methodology recently, has just been to pore over the works of early films advocates and critics and theorists with the intention of like compiling a list of classical film's foundational artistic properties, and then with that list of like Arnheim and Balazs and Eisenstein, et cetera, theories in hand, been researching spatially focused techniques that exist in 360 filmmaking currently, and some that are projections of what could exist to replace them. So now I intend to unpack with you a series of artistic opportunities inspired by the foundational artistic techniques of 2D filmmaking. So, foundation of classical cinema, number one, directing the viewer's attention across the screen. It's like clearly a critical element of old cinema. And a lot of this comes from the human eye has so much is lost to the periphery of our vision, so there's this need to actually be able to direct a viewer's attention around a screen so that they can see what you need them to see. And directors in the past in 2D video had used motion and human indicators and hinting, like the gaze, to guide a viewer's focus around a space. And this is really like the keystone of direction. So 360 cinema, really no different. It's just that the space is larger, that you're dealing with like more space being lost to the peripheries, so like further kind of blur out zone. So classical cinema frequently opted to use eyeline matching to carry a viewer's eye around the frame. And in case you are not familiar, eyeline matching is a cut between two shots that creates the illusion of a character looking at an element. The direction of the character's eyes and the first shot shows the viewer where to be looking in the subsequent shot. And we can see an example of this in these two frames from Sherlock Jr., where we have a character who is looking across a frame, and then we cut to a character that is in the place that he's looking at, and we know exactly not just like where to look, but also how to feel about where we're looking based on the expression of the initial character. So in 360 cinema, when directing the audience's attention, we can replace the subtlety of the hint of the character's gaze with the more human experience of presenting characters that can be physically followed around a space. The video below, the sand dune jumping video, is just like, it's a more fun documentary style example of this, but you see this a lot in documentary 360, and it's exactly what needs to replace this, which is like characters that will come very close to your viewpoint and feeling like they're interacting with you, and then they can guide you to something else. That is kind of our equivalent of hinting here, is to just be literally physically led around the space, directed to the next thing. Cool, next up. Next foundation of classical cinema that we can address is viewpoints. So back to Arnheim for a second. Love him. I'm sorry I keep quoting him. It's just very, very helpful for this. In regards to camera technique, he'd urged 20th century film or early directors to build artistic impression through finding and displaying unfamiliar and often unseen in everyday life camera angles. And from this sentiment comes the oblique camera technique that's also known as the Dutch angle. And these are shots that elicit disorientation by rotating the camera relative to the horizon. So because it's impossible, if we can imagine a 360 film being projected onto a circle, it's technically like it's impossible to rotate the camera in some direction because you're pointing in every direction. It's impossible to actually rotate your horizon. That's something that would cause extreme disorientation. But you can consider the idea of that sort of movement from a different axis, which would be the y-axis. So by moving the camera from the human's eye point of view from that of a bird or a worm, we can create artistic impact through unreal presence, which is like a rare opportunity to experience unimaginable perspectives, like actually live in these unimaginable perspectives and be transported there. The two comparisons that I'm choosing to use here are the sort of Dutch angle used in the birds versus Anderson and Kuhn's Parallax, which is a horror 360 experience that came out in 2015, where you're really like maximizing on the fear of a scene by putting the user at the lowest possible point, like turning them into the most like insignificant, tiniest object in the room. Cool, so next up, transition. The ability to magically take an audience from one scene to another via transition is a key feature of cinema, and obviously very necessary for 360. So the dynamics of transition can be effectively employed in 360, but director always needs to consider the mental and physical exhaustion of context change. Cuts can be physically jarring, difficult on the eyes, and context changes can really negatively affect the user's sense of presence if done too frequently or sort of improperly. So Rethinking standard transition techniques like dissolves and hard cuts as portals and teleportation mechanisms helps to prevent disembodiment. So this is more of, I'm showing two similar examples here, a literal like a portal fade on the 360 side compared to a lap dissolve on the 2D film side. But this is more of like a way of thought, of thinking of every single time that you transition a user from one place to another, it's an instance to, you're actually teleporting them. You think about it as like some kind of physical conveying mechanism, like what physical thing could take them from one space to another, whether it's like taking them there on a dolly or like handling a transition like a portal. Cool. So with transition comes montage. And before montage, time and filmed was essentially arranged like a stage play. Montage was what brought nonlinear imagery to film in general and offered an artistic method that was counter to its supposed objectivity. I feel like this is one of the biggest like initial objectivity breakers of film. It shook up the common notion that films should act as stage plays. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm just gonna jump here. So space in 360 film might be represented more objectively, but time is absolutely still open for artistic interpretation. Pudovkin's methods of juxtaposition of montage still apply, some of those methods being contrast or parallelism or similarity, synchronism, etc. If we think about montage from the perspective of 360's unique artistic opportunities, and those being derived from presence and like teleportation and being somewhere specifically, it seems clear that the immersive answer to classical film's montage as narrative juxtaposition is the use of montage as surreal mobility. Like, give me a second to explain what that somewhat gibberish means for a second. So on top, we're seeing montage as narrative. The example from October, we see like crowd, cannon, man, we know what happens. We're not seeing the events play out in real time, but we're seeing an artistic interpretation of time. What we see in the bottom one, these shots from Miyubi, is, I'm considering it surreal mobility. Miyubi does this really incredible job in the film of docking, because you are a robot in the film Miyubi, and you are docked by having these two arms the whole time. So if you are given the opportunity to, sometimes you transition from rooms that have similar architectures, and when you can do that, there's the experience of being able to literally, like, you've created a mobility with consistency that you cannot have in real life. Cool, so foundation of classical cinema, number 5, field of view. The camera's field of view, determined by distance and focal length, determines the range of subject matter visible, and in 2D cinema, this allowed for the composition of visual elements in a scene. A change in FOV was often used to denote a change in relationship with on-screen subject matter. So that could have been like a change in how you're supposed to feel about the subject matter, or a change in the layout and the composition. And the most common use of this is, and the most popular, probably the close-up, a device that's used to build intimacy and show detail. And I think a big complaint that we get from creators, particularly when I've had conversations with creators at Facebook and trying to design tools for them, is, what about my close-up? I can't do my close-up anymore. Like, how do I show those things? And finding solutions for that is very difficult and interesting. And part of it is really just thinking about it differently. So understanding that meaningful field of view changes are still possible in 360 film, but they require consideration of the human eye. Immersive mediums in general require a wider field of view to cater to our natural field of view as human beings, and we can simulate intimacy in 360 by cutting from a scene with a wider field of view to a narrow field of view, and then also moving to different areas in space, like using that teleportation to get around. I'm calling that an intimate context change, and you can use that to make the entire environment or an entire chunk of the environment feel closer to the viewer. The comparison that I'm making here, I feel like the scene of the close-up is pretty self-explanatory, so I'm just gonna look at the intimate context change, which is in You Can't Fight Fire with Fire, which is like a demo video from General Electric. It just like happens to be a big favorite of ours at the office. But So you can see this change happening from top to bottom, and it's harder to see in this echo-rect view, when everything is laid out like that, but essentially you're at a distance, and when you're moved closer to the subject matter that is speaking to you, like the camera physically moves across the scene, but also the field of view seems to slightly change in that point in time, which like creates an element that feels similar to a close-up. Cool, so, and finally of this list, we have sound. And I'm going to use Synchronous, which is like maybe not that popular, like an AV term to describe how we should handle this, but Synchronous, just to give a brief background, is the perfect coordination of sight and sound on screen. And this has been a key factor of cinematic world building and suspension of disbelief since the popularization of the sound film. So with that in mind, the inclusion of audiovisual synchronization must be a key element of creatively building a sense of place and presence within 360 film. I highly suggest reading this book also. It has nothing to do with like VR really, but it's just, I think it's the most incredible book ever written about sound and film. Okay, so in order to create synchrosis that we can achieve in classical film, like that type of synchrosis, we can't do it simply by pairing a sound and an image on screen when we're dealing with 360 film. It's not quite that simple. That can also take our user out of the place that we're trying to make them believe that they're in. So in 360 film, you need to consider the location of sound within the audience's experiences in space. We're teleported to a place via 360 experiences, and when that happens, objects are in front of us, they're behind us, they're above us, they're everywhere, and when sound is just coming, when sound is headlocked, it's gonna absolutely take us out of the moment. So something that I'm calling spatial sound synchrosis, being the consideration of sound synchrosis of the old format of cinema in a spatial sense, is like it allows us to actually create impactful immersive experiences by having sounds in both time and space. This is if you're looking for like examples that you can find for free on the internet, like on YouTube, that are really good exampple of this video, I'm bringing it up twice in a row, but they have incredible audio spatialization. It's really, really interesting. There's all this fire happening everywhere, and it's very well spatialized. I think a lot about this side of things too, because one of the other creator product that I work on is the Audio 360 tools. So I'm like having to simultaneously think about how can we take the entire production process that we're used to in film and convert it into 360 and provide the tools that have existed previously in their new adapted formats, but also giving people teaching experiences. It's a very interesting challenge. But that's the end of the tip section of this talk. I'm just gonna wrap things up a little bit, but I really hope that I was able to help you see 360 media and VR film with as much opportunity as early film theorists saw in film. And I apologize to anyone of which this is too much of a kind of reiteration of things that they already know from. Just wanted to take one of the talks of the day from an artistic perspective and kind of think about like, not just how we create, but what we're actually putting on screen and how we're thinking about our creative process. But yeah, I don't know that I have to say this to this room, but I will anyway, but like don't be scared of creation in a new medium. Don't be frightened of like breaking up the way that you used to build. If you used to build things for cinema, if you've done game development, don't be afraid of like breaking up that process and inviting a completely new process. Dissuade people around you from being the naysayers from the dawn of cinema, from being those people that Arnheim was referencing. Because really, like, no media type exists in a vacuum, and we really can't get attached to any specific artistic practice because they're all in a continuum. I'll reference earlier this year here in Toronto, I was speaking at another FITC event, which is so fun, love you guys. And I insisted on people using the history of typography as inspiration for designing like future-focused immersive UI. And it's an important yet bittersweet sentiment that as the future of immersive media promises to completely cannibalize the practice of typography, which I love so very much, but it doesn't matter because we're moving forward and we will use the history of the past to inspire the future of our creation. But the thesis here, again, no different. All media types are constructs. The only thing consistent about them is that they never stop changing. Don't even get too used to this. Just ride the wave and help define and validate the artistic merit and the pillars of quality in immersive film, and help us be one of those 360 film pioneers. And please let me know if you use our products, if there's anything that we can add to them, if there's anything that we can do to greater facilitate your personal immersive media creativity. We are always open to hearing usage suggestions, opinions, etc. So, as I say at Facebook, be bold. Thank you.
Thank you again, Michelle.